So let me get to the introductions, and I have to say that I've introduced lots of people in my career. I have never introduced a 3-star admiral. So congratulations to Anne. We're very pleased to have Anne here as our moderator. Anne served for 38 years in the U.S. Navy. Most recently was president of the National Defense University. She served at a time of tremendous change, both geopolitically and within the armed forces, and she'll be talking to us a little bit more about that as well. She was named a White House Fellow, a Chief of Naval Operations Strategic Studies Fellow, and a permanent member of the Council of Foreign Relations. She has an extraordinary background, and I can't tell you how excited we are to have her. I will give you a few fun facts about admirals in the Navy. First of all, Anne is the second 3-star admiral in the history of the U.S. Navy, and that's quite remarkable. The first admiral ever, female admiral in the Navy, was only appointed in 1976, and it was not until last year that we had a 4-star admiral in the U.S. Navy. So those are quite remarkable facts and a testimony to this remarkable woman who is here with us today. Rod Canyon is our second speaker, and if Houston were to have a Business Hall of Fame, I have no doubt that Rod would be in the inaugural class. He brought great fame to our city, and of course, as the founder of Compaq Computer, is known worldwide for what he was able to do. And speaking about disruption, I think that few companies in the world have been more disruptive than Compaq in terms of how they were able to change the face of the computer industry. As you know, or as you will know, Rod started his career at Texas Instruments, and basically with a couple colleagues on a napkin designed what was going to be and become Texas Instruments. A couple of interesting facts there, and I hope I get this right, Rod. Compaq had the largest first-year sales in the history of American business. Is that correct? And you got to $1 billion in revenues faster than any other company at that point in time as well, which I think is quite remarkable. The other point that he pointed out a couple of weeks ago when I heard him speak is that at one point in time, 3 of our largest PC makers in the United States were headquartered in Texas. We all know, obviously, Dell, we all know Compaq, and I'll let you ask him who the third one was. Quite surprising. Finally, Michael Marquardt, who lived through one of the great disruptions of our lifetimes as a young citizen in West Berlin, Germany. Michael has had a remarkable career between medicine and technology. Currently, he serves as the CEO of Global Compass Strategies. He has also been an active CEO of a number of other companies. Most importantly, he was CEO of MediGuide, which also served to be a disruptive force in the medical profession. He splits his time between his farm in Delaware and New York City, and tells me that he has an extremely large wine cellar in Delaware. So if any of you get invited, you'll have a fun weekend. So with that, I'd like to introduce our 3 panelists, and please welcome them to the stage.
We have, of course, 2 extraordinary leaders. You have heard their backgrounds, and in each case, they wanted to go right into questions. So I'll start this, and I've got at least 19 questions. And I sent them to Rod last night. He says, let's just start with one and see how it goes. So I'll start this, and then we certainly invite your engagement, because this is about serving you, and so I will do that. But as we talk about disruptors, and obviously there's been a lot of them, and in discussions about this, the idea of speed and how fast things are going, and have we gone past Moore's Law? Are we now into Metcalfe's Law? Are we into some other kind of world? It moves so fast. And of course, as we know, one of the comments brought up this morning and last night was, look at Netflix and Blockbuster and how fast that went. Look at in my era, look at how fast the VCR went away. So it's about the things that touch us, but also about the things that we don't see. So looking at Rod's background and knowing what an extraordinary story his is. And by the way, I will on my own hawk his book. This is his book. I'm going to put it right here for everyone to see. There you go. And the book, though, the story is an interesting story, not only about disruption, but about innovation and adapting. So, Rod, for you first, as we look at boards and board oversight, how does a board position itself on the right side of the wave of disruption and get on the right side of innovation?
That's a really simple question. And I'm glad you asked. Diane, thanks for being here. You know, the role of a director is not as clear, I think, as it should be. When you think about the disruptions that we've seen and experienced in the past, let's say 2 decades, there were some pretty big ones. And unless you stop and think about it, you may not realize, but they're coming more often. The world really is speeding up. Technology may be at the heart of it because it's really technology that's speeding up. New things, new breakthroughs are coming out faster and faster. And if that weren't enough, you've got government regulations that are constantly being improved, if that's the right word. Increased, maybe, is a better word. And all the things that flow from that, economic upheaval. So when I sit back and think about how do directors deal with disruptive forces, first thing that comes to my mind is that's not our job. That's really the job of management. You know, we're typically, and in fact, in my opinion, directors don't need to really understand the business of the company. They need to know it, you know, at least in a broad sense, and you know, maybe in some cases at the detail level. But each director on a board needs to bring some experience, background, skills that when they add together with the other directors, really give you a global view of any issue that comes along. But really, management is the part of the company that's out there on the front lines, seeing things every day, seeing things change. And they're really the ones that need to be on top of spotting disruptions coming along. The problem often is that they're too close to it. And there are a number of examples. My favorite example of that in recent history, of course, I guess my real favorite is when Compaq was disruptive. We were the disruptor. But in 2007, Apple came out with the first iPhone. It truly was a toy. And their competitors in the computer industry, HP, Dell, you name it, all along the list, looked at it and said, yeah, that's what we would have expected from Apple. At that point, they had the opportunity to look a little closer and see, well, you know, that multi-touch interface, now that's different. That really solves one of the most fundamental limitations of notebook computers, which is how small can they get without having too small a screen. And now when you can blow something up and see it and then make it smaller and move things around, it really opens up a whole new way of using small screens. But they missed that. They thought they understood, you know, this has been tried before. They had all tried the phones. In 2010, Apple came out with the first tablet. Now, it was the first tablet of this era because all the computer companies knew what tablets were. They had all tried them. They had all failed because the way tablets had been, there wasn't a big demand for it. Yeah, sure, there were these niches that they could sell them in, but they weren't in general demand. What they missed was this user interface made it easy for anybody, not just computer professionals, to navigate, to do things that were really useful to them. And then when they added this third-party application thing, you know, how many million apps are available now for all the different things that are out there. But when you literally put tens of thousands of individual creators in business solving problems for people of all kinds, now you've got a real movement going on. So a breakthrough user interface, always connected to the internet, and third-party apps that solve specific problems in a few clicks, that was a breakthrough. But these competitive companies, the management of them, thought they knew what they were doing. They thought this was going to fail. And so by the time they began to figure out maybe there's really something going on here, it was really too late for that era. Apple had taken charge and it left them completely behind. So my point is, management should have seen it. They should have been more critical of the status quo, and yet they're so close to things, sometimes they're not the ones. So where does the board come in? I think the board comes in asking the hard question. Why didn't the board of HP say, well, you tell me you've got this under control, but let's dig into that deeper. Maybe the next board meeting or two, let's have somebody really analyze what this new technology means to computers in general, maybe tablets specifically, and then keep pushing on it. I think too often we gain confidence in our management, as we should, and then we sort of let them run. Well, it's their job to do the day-to-day, but it's the board's job to ask the hard question, and then here's the key. Don't back off. Don't be pushed back. Don't be intimidated. Use your experience and your judgment, and if this seems like something maybe it really deserves continuing to stay on top of, keep after it. And that would be sort of the bottom line message I would give you today is that's the main role of a board, to help management find where they need to be focused by asking the right question.
Based upon your global connections and how you have seen boards operate globally, particularly in your role in Asia and Malaysia, how do you keep board members able to think outside the box so that they're not so close to it and they can be a constructive player in helping management be more informed?
Thank you, Ann. That's a great question, and thank you for the warm Texas welcome that we received here last night and today. Some of the things that Rob was just saying remind me of the saying that bankruptcies and revolutions have one thing in common. They start very, very slow, and then all of a sudden they go very, very fast. And I think disruptions in our economy and what boardrooms are facing happen in the same way. Things are evolving very slowly, and all of a sudden they move very, very quickly. And I think really one of the key things that I have seen around the world is that boards that have members that enjoy being contrarian, that are insanely curious about what's going on in their peer companies and in their industries and outside of their industries and in other countries in the same industry, are the ones that do really well. And I think that, it's very difficult to anticipate change, and it's very difficult, as Steve alluded to. I was living in Berlin when the Berlin Wall came down. I was there that night at the Brandenburg Gate. If you'd asked me a week before, when is the Berlin Wall going to fall, I would have said the first of never. It's not going to be anytime soon. And I think if you look back and you looked at how big German industrial conglomerates like Siemens or Daimler or Volkswagen or others were prepared, or never mind American multinationals with big presences in Europe, I would say there was really nobody that was really well prepared for this. And of course there were a lot of good things that came out of it, but there were really a lot of companies that struggled with adapting to this new environment. And I think there are a lot of things that are happening out there where, whether it's of course in the commodities markets, whether it's in technology, where there have been disruptions that nobody anticipated, and in many ways they could have been anticipated. And I think one of the pieces on Asia is that I actually say that the Asian business community that I've had an opportunity to interact with tends to really look to the United States from a governance perspective, and frankly eats up a lot of the information that NACD puts out. Personally, I've witnessed this, whether it's the Blue Ribbon Commission on Strategy and the board. To Rod's point, the pace is moving so quickly that if you're in a situation at your company where you're reviewing the company strategy once a year and concurring and moving on, you're going to be in that boat, I think, like Blockbuster or Kodak or some of the other companies that have been disintermediated over the last decade.
So how do you both feel about the balance between having a board that has a strategic mindset and yet having management that can act tactically? Because there is a sweet spot there on both of those. I was struck by your story last night about the Berlin Wall, that there may have been some strategic mindfulness by the president or by the Pope and all the big players that we've heard about, the union movement, but that ultimately it was the guard at the bridge who opened, or the guard at the Brandenburg Gate who made an independent choice as a guy who's just doing his duty to open up the gate without having anything. So what do you do about the tactical aspects of disruption and the strategic effects of disruption?
Well, I think, and the history favors the best prepared. I guess that's what I would say, is that if you have thought through some of the various things that can happen, if you've literally had a drill in the boardroom of how might we respond if this happens, how might we strategically respond, how might we tactically respond, you're going to be rewarded with success more often than the company that was not prepared. And I think there are strategic components. There's an old Native American Indian saying that is, the best fishing happens in muddy waters. I heard somebody at an NACD event a few days ago that said, from the Wall Street analogy of that is buy when there's blood on the street. I said, well, I like my analogy better. But I think when you have strategic uncertainty in any industry, it presents a tremendous opportunity. And of course, it's the old saying of the other side of the coin of risk is opportunity. And I really think it comes to preparation. And to Rod's point, I think I agree with him that on the board, you want to be in a position not of starting to manage what is going on in the company, but to ask the right questions and to almost perhaps have a designated contrarian that just take a side in an argument and say what might happen if the exact opposite of what everybody's telling us is actually going to happen, and if it does, it will happen quickly.
So Rod, what Michael kind of implies is that it's not only about the board and about management, but it's about the culture within the company that helps you to prepare for disruption. You are famously successful at developing company culture, so that everybody at Compaq was very aware, they were very on point, they were constantly very tuned to what was going on. And you even were, in your book, you talk about how you even had to make the lawyers really make you compliant with the law, because everybody was ready to move fast and move forward fast. So you had developed a company culture, which I think is kind of what Michael is implying is really important. How do you do that with a large corporation versus a medium and small size company?
It takes a lot of effort. It doesn't just happen. Over my years of experience, I've seen a lot of companies where the culture was sort of haphazard. Management wasn't connected with what was really going on down in the trenches. And so when tough times come along, you're really not sure what you've got. One of the things that I'm very much proud of about Compaq is when we started small and then grew rapidly, I immediately became afraid we were going to lose the special teamwork that we had there in the beginning. It's easy for a startup with 10 people to work together and to communicate every day. When you get to 100 people or 600 or 1,000, it's a whole lot harder, especially if that happens over a year or two. And so I spent a lot of time on the culture, and I really do believe it starts at the top. You've got to tell people what you expect, and then you've got to do it. There's never been a truer saying that's, if you tell them to do one thing and then do something else, you have no chance of getting them to do what you wanted them to. You've got to be the leader. You've got to lead by example. And you still got to tell people about it regularly. And why? Why it's important, because there is very good reason for it. And you can do it. Now, that works in big companies as well. Now, it may not work as consistently across a big company. It's going to be harder to get to everybody. But I've seen it happen, and I think it really is sort of underlying whatever comes along, whatever your strategy is, and the tactics that you decide to go after to achieve your strategy. You've got to have a team that works together, and the word culture, while it's misused a lot, is probably the best word to describe how you get people to work together and treat each other. But back to the issue of a disruption comes along, and you're either the predator or the predatee, if that's a word. Probably not. Prey, thank you. I like the word predatee. Because I'm thinking in terms of the 2008 crash. I mean, what a devastating financial event that was. Fortunately, most people in the world, I don't think, know how close we came to a real meltdown. It was bad enough, but it was very close. But after that was a time when a lot of companies weren't really prepared, and they became acquirees instead of acquirers. So if a company is, nobody knew how bad that was going to be. But you never know when something is going to go wrong, when there's going to be a disruption of one kind or another. So asking the questions at the board level, but mainly getting management tuned to sort of looking at what ifs. One of the questions I like to ask is, that's a nice plan. You know, if we achieve it, it looks good. We may exceed it. What happens if, let's say, if you're in a financial company and the markets go down 30%? Then what does that P&L look like? So the mental discipline and the sort of tactical discipline of looking at those what-ifs tends to get management thinking in terms of how they would deal with it, even if they think the farthest thing from reality is going to be some kind of big disruption. So in 2008 it happens. I happen to be on the board of a company that is public. I'm on one public board, Invesco. And they were one of those fortunate companies that were in solid financial position. As the dust settles in 2009, a lot of companies start coming up for acquisition. And the beauty of it is, just like you're saying, Michael, that it's not just like, there's one strategic opportunity. There were tons of companies out there that were either in need of being bought or were susceptible to being bought. So you're in the position to actually now do some shopping, pick and choose, and look carefully. And if you're smart, you don't go after, don't go gathering them into a basket as quick as you can. That will kill you, actually, if you overdo that. But if you pick the right one that fits in every way that's important, then you can come out on the other side and be much stronger than you were going in, and most importantly, not one of the companies that disappeared during that time.
I'd like to add,
Yeah, of course.
just one point, because I think if you take a step back, one of the things that always strikes me is if you turn on the television, which thankfully actually I do rarely these days, but if you turn on the television and you have journalists telling you how we live in these unprecedented times, there has never been more change more quickly, and I would actually argue that's absolutely not true. If you really historically look back, I mean, how would you like to have managed a multinational corporation in the 60s or in the 50s or in the 40s, during world wars going on and so forth? And I think really as a company, besides taking advantage of tactical opportunities, you really have to ask yourself the question, what business are we actually in? And that is a much harder question to answer than it sounds. And I guess to me, my favorite example of that is when you literally go back, not 10 years, not 20 years, but more than 100 years, and you look at the railroad companies. And I would argue that if most of the railroad companies, if they had realized that they were in the transportation business and not in the railroad business, we'd all be flying around the world on Union Pacific Airways. But not one of them decided to invest in that mode of transportation, not anywhere in the world. And I think that, and we've seen what's happened, and it's varied in different geographies. The United States happens to be a very big country, so air air mobility is something that is very advantageous. There are some other places in Europe that are much closer where it turns out railroads continue to innovate. But you really have to ask yourself the question, what business are you in? And I think Apple, you brought it up, Rod, it's a great example. If you're looking at a peer company and you think they're, they're a device maker, or they're, a software company, or they're, what's an energy company? I mean, what does that really mean? And what problem are you solving? And what are all the extensions and what are all the strategies that go into that? It's not so easy.
So no, it's a great comment, and it inspires kind of a follow-on question. So you're talking about imagination and innovation. How does a board capture effective imagination and innovation so they stay on the right side of that disruptive curve? I mean, that's a pretty high order when you're asking the question, what business are you in? And you have your quarterlies are coming in, and now I have my chairman is saying, well, I want you to be imaginative about what business you're in. How does a board achieve that level of quality thinking?
It's not easy. I would have to say that it is so much easier to just spend your time going through all the historical reports and looking at the green, yellow, red charts and make sure we're okay here, and then is management really on top of that? Yes, wonderful. I would have to say that in this day and age, if I had to name just one quality of a director that is the most important attribute to select for, it's an insatiable curiosity. If they have an insatiable curiosity in general, they will do so about their industry, about developments, technology developments in their industry and beyond their industry. They will be curious about the world and what's happening around them. And I really think that the more insatiable curiosity thinkers you have on your board, the better off you're going to be to respond, and not just respond, but proactively take advantage of opportunities.
So we've moved from technology and from the PC and those kind of things, and to the products that are disruptive. But last night in a conversation we had, when talking about oil firms and energy and all this, it started off with the engineering aspect of the architecture about what energy firms are facing, and ended up with a conversation about people. So every time we got into a conversation, it began with stuff and ended up with the head scratcher of, yeah, but it's all about people. Can you both comment on that and how boards should look at the people equation when they do there as a disruptive piece, either to the good or the bad?
From a board standpoint, I didn't mention board culture a while ago, and I think it fits with this because there are a lot of different characteristics of directors that are important, and you shouldn't expect every director to have all of those characteristics. It's probably not possible, but the whole makeup of the board added together really does need to have all of those different. But especially when you get down to dealing with a tough issue, and it can be an internal issue or it can be an external issue, the culture of the board will be a big part of determining how effectively the board deals with that issue. And now I'm talking about how the directors interact with each other. Very similar to how employees treat each other, but at the board level, very often you have some pretty strong personalities. You may have some ex-CEOs. Certainly you have successful people. And they have opinions. And so one of the things I think you've really got to pay attention to, in addition to looking for the right background and the skill, maybe there's a skill level that you want to add to the board, you find that. But as you're looking at candidates, it's important to make sure they understand how the board interacts and feel comfortable that they can interact that way. And specifically what that means is you've got something to say, but you also are very interested in what everybody else has to say. Some people speak up easily, some people are quieter, and there's one board I'm on where a very smart guy with a lot of experience doesn't say much, but when he goes, everybody looks at him and says, yeah, we want to hear what you have to say. Simply because that's the culture of that board where they really are interested in what everybody has to say. And in that regard, you can deal with an issue nobody's left, on the sidelines, and you get everybody's input much quicker, much easier, and you're much better prepared to solve the problem. So, that's how the culture of the board, I think, prepares you then for dealing with a disruptive force.
Yeah, and I think maybe from a practical perspective, I agree with everything that Rod just said. From a practical perspective, I would add that in this day and age, and again, perhaps also 100 years ago, the more you can actually, as a board, spend quality time on strategy, whether that's by using devices such as consent agendas or other ways that you're really able to maximize the time that you can have an open dialogue, the better off you are. I think there's never been a board member who said, I wish we spent less time on strategy. I think it's where the diversity of experience, the diversity of thought, diversities of geographic upbringing and so forth really come into play. And unfortunately, too often I see companies in very fast-changing industries and in other areas that sort of, okay, well now we have about 20 minutes left because we've just spent all our time reviewing audit committee reports and so forth. And I think that, and you can't do that in an annual strategic retreat, in my personal opinion. I think it's something that, and Rod and I were talking a little bit earlier before breakfast, it's something that perhaps you break up the different areas of the strategy and you look at your own corporate strategy, you look at what's going on in your industry at different meetings. But I would certainly advise that if you're only looking at it once a year and you're not integrally involved as a board, that's probably something that could be improved upon.
So from the floor, as we are talking about disruption, the question is for both of you, could you give some examples of top performing boards that have dealt with disruption?
Well, I'll take the easy answer while Michael's thinking about it. The one public board I'm on, Invesco, as I mentioned, was faced with, like every other company in the world, and especially in the financial services world, with a severe disruption. And when it happened, the board, obviously, it was easy to become aware of it, but we spent a substantial amount of time with management looking at what it meant, where we were going in all of that, and then after the dust settled, we began to look at, okay, how can we take advantage of that? So I think those are the, whether you call those strategic or tactical, there's a fine line there, and I don't get too hung up between those two, because strategy is, the general direction you're going and what you're trying to accomplish. Without the tactics, it's not going to get you very far. One other time, perhaps, Invesco has had to deal with, like a lot of companies in the financial services, rapidly increasing government oversight. And the one, maybe the most fundamental lesson I've learned out of all that is that when a regulator, I don't care who they are, knocks on your door, sends you a letter, you better pay attention. What I've seen is, and this almost gets back to the general disruption issue, management, they've been working hard, they feel like they've got it under control, and this regulator is saying, there's something wrong here. And the first reaction usually is, they're wrong. Well, they may or may not be wrong, but that's not the point. The point is, if they said it, you better take it seriously, and you better immediately give them strong feedback that you're going to work with them and be part of the solution, whatever it is. And if in fact they're wrong, that'll show up along the way. But maybe the worst words you can ever let come out of your mouth is, I don't agree, we're going to push back. Regulators have a way of getting even. I mean, they're people after all, and so just be careful. Start out with a we're part of the team solving this, and that's hard to do. But I think a director's role can very importantly be as a helper of management to get their mind around, we really have to deal with this in a constructive way, not a their crazy way.
I'm really glad that Rod gave me an opportunity to think about this answer, and I would say I'm going to give you a question. How many of you would think that the answer I'm about to give is going to involve a company based in Detroit? Show of hands? No, I think you all thought I was going to Mountain View, California, or Cupertino, California. I would argue that a company a board that did an incredible job and that is not talked about often enough is the board of Ford Motor Company in the 2007, 2008, 2009 time period. Not only did they do their job, the most important job of any board, of selecting the chief executive in Al Mulally extremely well, I also think that they strategically and tactically responded almost batting 1,000 with regards to leveraging the Ford brand to secure as much in funding as they possibly could prior to the financial crash. And I think it really was no accident that they were able to navigate that incredible disruption of a disappearance of liquidity and a global downturn. For a company that size and that old, I really think that the board did an unbelievable job.
In a capital-intensive industry.
Yes.
So I have a question here for me. It says, for Ann, what lessons can the military give business and vice versa about handling disruption? So this is a book, and it's a book to be not yet written, but it's really an important piece about military history, because you can go around and find errors and mistakes and victories and great things happen when you're dealing with disruption in military. What does strike me is that all of the business books, Attila the Hun's best guide to CEOs and I there's a one about how SEALs can advise CEOs, and I mean there's a whole industry out there of small books about how the military can advise business, and it's a whole, and they almost always say the same thing. They take the culture of the subculture of whatever it might be, and then they apply it to core principles about leadership and management, and about the management of scarcity, and about leadership, and also about the things that you've heard today. So planning, clarity, knowing what you do, what is your core mission, and what is your core work and your core issues. But one of the great disruptors that we've heard about in the last 12 years is about IEDs. So the United States Army, Marine Corps all goes into Iraq and Afghanistan, and they've got lots of stuff going. And what happens but cell phones and IEDs blow up Americans who are fighting. And it becomes a huge national agony, because you have people coming home who have no legs and no arms, this kind of thing. It's all caused by cell phones that are throwaways. They buy them, they'll set off the IED and throw it away. This was amazingly difficult for the United States military, because the R&D and the RDT&E process is a 10-year process. Where you have to put in all of the regulations and all of the submissions and all those things. So there is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying, I want a process that allows me to bring technology to the problem within the month or the 6 months. We need to get this going. So it became a disruptive piece to not only the warfighting, but also to how we do procurement. So there's a bad disruption there, the maiming of soldiers and Marines and sailors. And then there is the good disruption there, because it caused some deep questions about about procurement. So I think that there's lots to the question, but I would say that it is about leadership. It is about allowing for the dissenting voice to be heard, and as you're planning. And there's a lot to it, but from business, what you learn for the military is kind of the bottom line as to how you produce and perform. There's a lot more to the question, but I can go with that. Any other questions from the floor that anybody wants to ask? Yes, ma'am. Yes, 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 sir. While I'm waiting for the written one.
Well, my name's Oliver Bell, and thanks for your service, ma'am. I'm actually former Army, so I bow down in terms of Navy having beaten us several times the last couple of years of football.
You know, Tom, where's Tom? Isn't that a great thing, Tom? Okay. Tom's a Naval Academy graduate.
And as they say, we're on the same team, 364.
That's
We
right.
only oppose each other one day a year.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. We all hope so, too.
Not soon enough.
Yeah.
And I'm not quite certain how to phrase this question, but it does have to do with this whole concept of disruption in this sense. First-time experiences. You know, I've been in business for a while, but there were some things, and I like to think of myself as forward-thinking, I'm sure as a lot of us do. But what happens when you hit those first-time scenarios? I had never gone through, when we talk about the financial crisis, I had no idea what the impact of someone calling me and saying, my bank failed, meant. I had no idea, you mentioned the situation in Iraq where the IEDs, when things just pop up all of a sudden, they're first-time events that you know that there's something there, but how do we avoid being asleep at the switch, I guess is the best question, because we don't know what we don't know.
Okay, I will defer to our guest here.
I think that's at the heart of the matter, is you never know. You know, we could sit here and talk about potential disruptions, and it'd be interesting, but I'm not sure how useful it would be, because you never really know, the next one that's coming until it gets there. And so, being prepared as best you can be, and never thinking you've really got it under control, I guess is sort of the mentality of directors and of management. And it still gets back to not doing it once a year, or once every few years would be terrible, but to, on a regular basis, become part of the normal process of the board and of management dealing with the board, of thinking about different areas at different times. You can't think of all of the possible disruptions. You can look at government regulation, you can look at the Affordable Care Act, you can look at technology in your industry, which is going to vary widely. Look at the price of oil recently, dropping over 50% in, 6 months. Did that disrupt anybody? I think it disrupted everybody one way or the other, in Houston especially. But you couldn't have predicted it was going to drop 50%, but certainly anybody in that business needed to be thinking about, if there's one thing we know, it's cycles are real. And so I don't care how good it is today, tomorrow it could be a lot worse, and vice versa. When things go down, they're going to come back up in that kind of industry. It's a cyclical industry.
I'd like to add one point to Rod's comments, and I guess what I'd like to get at is that what is really important in terms of board culture and management culture in companies is to have an inherent humbleness about what's going on in the world. Because if you think you know the answers, I think you're already starting off on the wrong foot. I think we live in a world, and again, perhaps we have always lived in a world where we're really being humble about the fact that you may not know what is really at play here. And you may only find out by talking to a mentor or a colleague that went through something similar 30 years ago, 50 years ago, and don't dismiss their comments of, oh, no, we're living in a different world right now. I would really say that just as a psychological attribute, on a board, and for that matter as a CEO, really think about being humble, and think about that you may not actually know the answer. And I think you're going to be better prepared than a lot of other people that are just running ahead and think they got it all figured out. This world is way too complex to have all the answers.
And remember, you come out of a down cycle, and things are starting up, and when you first come out of it, people are really aware, and they're on guard, and they're really prepared. That's maybe the most prepared they'll ever be for the next down cycle. The longer the recovery lasts, the less and less prepared you are, because it's further in history, and you sort of forget the lessons. And how many of you heard people say at the end of a very long, strong cycle, yeah, but this one's different? Yeah. It's human nature. You begin to think, okay, we've got this. That's an alarm. That's when you say, wait, let's start out with the assumption we don't have it. Now, where are we missing it?
And there can be a herd mentality that really sets in, and there's that media narrative that everybody sort of keeps hearing, and it is really difficult to try and divorce yourself from that.
So this is actually related to to your comments. The setup is this: some people think that the current price, I guess that this is about an energy price downspin in the energy industry is part of the normal cycle common to that business. Others think of that it is the result of a fundamental technological shift, a disruption. How do you tell which it is when there are multiple explanations for a market shift, cycle or fundamental disruption?
It's always the same. The price of oil is a supply and demand issue. And so it's when supply is greater than demand is when price goes down, and when demand is greater than supply, price goes up. Now, it sounds like I'm oversimplifying it, but at its heart, that's really the issue. And so that's why it's always going to be cyclical. You never get them in balance. They're in balance as the two lines cross, for a few milliseconds. And so I think you've got to be on top, if that's your industry, you've got to really be on top of both of those equations. And you may not know exactly when it's going to happen, but you do know that if the price of oil is going up or is staying high, well, that means there's more supply than demand, or more demand than supply, sorry. And that's going to change. At some point, the technology in this case is what brought the supply up, but there was also, on the other side of it, a lowering demand as after, it was a delayed reaction after 2008. The U.S. economy slowed down, and then Europe sort of, even after that, stayed down. And so the supply wasn't increasing, and in some areas it was, the demand, was not increasing, it was decreasing in some areas. And could we have predicted that with the new technology and the lower demand that they were going to cross? Well, certainly in hindsight we could have. But I think that's the kind of thinking you need to do, is looking at the components that cause it.
So, Michael, as you get ready to answer that part, also add, Rod's talking about a market that is cyclic. You've been in the world of medicine that can be enormously non-cyclic, and your MetaGuide was a disruptor. So as you answer this part, the first part, would you also talk about a market where really it is not as cyclic as it is constantly changing and disruptive?
Well, thank you, Ann. And I will say I'm not an energy expert, but I think one of the things that has been really fascinating to watch with regards to the development of oil prices is the almost perfect storm, depending on what side of the equation you're sitting on, but of geopolitical developments that have coincided with technological developments. And it's not necessarily clear to everybody that President Putin would invade Crimea a week after the Winter Olympics. It wasn't necessarily clear to everybody that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia would take the stance that it did with regards to its production of oil. And but it's really been an interesting interplay of the West trying to stick it to Putin and via sanctions and other things, and at the same time an abundance of supply coming out of the United States due to tremendous technological innovation. Now, to your point, Anne, the medical world is interesting. My dad's a surgeon, and I come from a family of people in medicine, and I think it's probably one of the last broad sectors of the economy worldwide that is really being impacted by technological change. I think all of you who've been to a doctor's office in the last year or two can attest to having filled out the same form for the third or fourth or fifth or sixth or 10th time, and you just can't believe that we haven't made more progress than that. And one of the things that the internet has done for your average citizen, your average patient, is that, and this is both good and bad, is that there are a lot of answers that you can find out there And it's driving the medical profession absolutely up the wall. I think it's the worst thing ever that people, go onto WebMD or some website and say, well, I just need you to prescribe this drug. I already know what I have. and it's, of course, very, very difficult and very dangerous. And, what Anne alluded to is a company that I co-founded is called MediGuide. And we actually tried to solve a particular issue of actually helping your local physician. Let's say you're not so lucky to live next door to MD Anderson Cancer Center, but you're living, somewhere else, and or you might even be living overseas as an expatriate working for the DuPont company or another company, and you get a strange reading on your annual PSA test, or you get you find a lump. Typically, what you're concerned about is are you in the right place? And what would they do for me at MD Anderson? What would they do for me at Memorial Sloan Kettering? Or what would they do for me at Johns Hopkins? And we actually developed a way, not just through telemedicine, but actually also through FedEx and UPS, but in a very organized fashion, to give you that answer within 5 to 7 business days in a legal way that involved the physicians involved at both ends. And it was something that was very interesting because I specifically remember calling the first medical center that we were approaching with this idea. And this is about 15 years ago. And I mean, they first thought we were crazy, absolutely, completely crazy. And then they started asking, well, how much would we get paid? And then I don't want to digress too much, but what was interesting is that we decided to pay the medical centers up front, which we were definitely not used to, because they were used to chasing payments, and we were paying the doctors up front, and they literally got a check FedEx to them. And that was sort of our own little way of disrupting that industry, and it turned out to be fairly successful.
So for a quick note here on the issue of cyclic energy from the military, about 10 years ago I was part of a study group that did long-term thinking about the world and everything else. And one of our conclusions was that oil and fossil fuels would continue on a cycle of some sort, and that the demand would be what it is, but that this was something the global markets have been able to understand and manage quite well, even though the militaries have gone to war for many times over oil. What we were predicting is that by 2020, the war would be over water. And right now, if you look at Yemen, it is predicted that it will be the first country to have run out of water resources. Now think about that. Yemen and no water, and that the next military action could be to help people from panicking because there is no water. This is an interesting question. As you talk about board characteristics, what are your thoughts as to the difference if private equity firms or hedge funds have reps on the board? Aren't they good at thinking about the unknown unknowns?
That's a great question, if I may opine on that first.
Yeah.
I won't bore you with some of my personal experience, but I would say that the private equity world is a fascinating part of the economy, and can play a tremendous role, obviously, and has in many companies, and it tends to, focus management's mind when private equity groups get involved. I have to say that actually I believe that there are quite a few private equity deals that I have seen where the private equity firm would have been well served to also specifically recruit an independent director, to the board, as opposed to just populating the board with partners on the deal team and so forth. And there's tends to be a very focused mindset to a private equity deal, and I'm sure Rod can add to this. But it's all about the multiples, and it's all about perhaps taking out cost, or perhaps somehow having a way of leveraging that investment within a certain time period. And I would say that oftentimes that doesn't lend itself to really innovating or really thinking around the corner of what might come for this business. 10 years down the road?
Well, I agree with all of that. I think my experience has been very good with private equity and directors out of private equity firms. But they're also people, and if you think they have, if they think they have all of the answers, then they're probably going to find some problems. So the fact that a board, a company is either has an investment from private equity or is acquired, can be a big positive experience, but it doesn't sort of remove the need to have a board suited for where you're taking the company. Now, sometimes they buy the company for the purpose of breaking it apart or whatever, a specific purpose, and there it's different from a long-term, how are we going to navigate through this industry? So in those cases, then that's appropriate. But in the general case where you're investing and you want to be involved, you're going to add something to the board, that's a good thing, as long as they participate in the culture of the board in a normal way.
Okay, a last question. As everybody leaves back to their offices, what would you say, each of you, that you would impart as your primary takeaways for them to think about with regard to board oversight and disruption?
I would say, to summarize, is don't think that you know all the answers. Be curious about what's going on in your industry. Demand that management supply you with information outside of the typical channels, and also seek those out yourself, and really be tuned into how various geopolitical or technological innovations could impact your business down the road.
And so if you're on a board and you're taking care of what turns out to be a lot of required board business, it's very important that you carve out time, every meeting, and deal with these kinds of issues: disruptive issues, strategic issues, culture issues, things that are at the heart of making a company strong and then preparing it for whatever change comes along. Keeping in mind, you're almost never going to know before it gets there. But the mentality, I think, humility is a very good way of looking at it. Humility simply meaning, I don't think I know all the answers, and I know I need to be lucky, but if I'm going to be lucky, I need to be prepared to be lucky. And so asking the right questions of management, and then continuing to press when you feel like maybe they haven't quite got to the bottom of that yet. And I really believe in the long term that will pay off as a board.
So on the last comment on my end, there's one of the questions was about higher ed, and I could go on about that and what the kinds of disruptors that are there. But fundamentally, in my view, part of this is about belief. What do you believe? It gets back to Rod's comment about what do you think your core, or maybe it was Michael, what is your core business? But belief is really important as far as it takes you to some core reality check about what it is that you truly believe, then make some adjustments, I think is pretty important. With that, I think that we are on the clock here, David, and so we thank you very much.
Thank you. Ann, Rod, Michael, thank you very much.